Okay, Wally, whenever you're ready.
Okay, good morning, everyone. The topic I want to discuss this morning has to do with security procedures in shul. Not just our shuls, but shuls all over. But security issues are local issues. And the fact remains that the issue is not a new one. Jews have, not only Jews, but people in general, were always concerned about security in their communities. Communities today are a bit different than they were in times gone by, but in the Mishnaic period, for example, people lived in towns and villages that were very often surrounded by a wall, and questions came up: A, who has to pay for building the wall, and who has to pay for maintaining the security of the town inside the wall, that people shouldn't breach the wall and cause harm to people inside. So the security procedures today, whether it's via volunteers, whether it's through hiring security personnel, whether they be armed, whether they not be armed, this raises a whole host of halakhic questions in terms of responsibility for maintaining security, and also issues that come up in terms of Shabbos and Yontif, in terms of the halachos involved there. But there are some challenges, and every shul will do what is in their best interest, guided by their own halakhic advisors or their rabbis. And I'm not posting any shilas today. I'm just going over some of the basics in terms of what the sources discuss. The first issue is volunteers versus hired personnel. Obviously, every shul has to conduct their own security evaluation along with local police and other experts. Unfortunately, this became an issue following 9/11. Before 9/11, you very rarely had this problem. Occasionally, large shuls would hire some type of security for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but basically this was not a concern. Following 9/11 and following a lot of the anti-Semitic incidents that have happened in America and throughout Europe, and of course what went on in Israel and what has continued to go on in Israel, it's become an issue. I know in Israel, every time you walk into a large facility or shul or a hall, there are always armed guards checking handbags, asking you if you're carrying a weapon or not, even on Shabbos. And if you are carrying a weapon on Shabbos because you have to, they ask you, at least to be aware of who's carrying a weapon. But we're not dealing with that at this point. The issue of volunteers versus hired personnel. Can the people who don't want to volunteer insist on hiring somebody to do this? And the Gemara discusses, we're in Bava Basra, a lot of discussion, because this is a real problem. How to collect the funds necessary, first of all, to build a wall, and then to protect the wall. And there are three options that the Gemara mentions. A flat rate for every individual in the city, or a tax based on a person's income. Not necessarily how much you earn, but how much you stand to lose, or how much benefit you receive from being protected. It's a fascinating system. And then another third option is how far away from the edge of the city you are. If you live in the middle of the city, there was less of a chance of being attacked than if you live closer to the wall. So the Gemara describes all these different options in terms of, now, how do we do it in shuls? Do we ask for volunteers, or do we assess a fee to hire somebody? Most shuls do a combination of both. We hire volunteers, but because of the heightened security needs, we also have hired security personnel who are armed, which is a sad comment on contemporary society. But these are the options the Gemara mentions, and these are not new issues. The fascinating discussion, what about a caravan that's lost in the desert and they have to pay money to get out of to find their way home? So if they were attacked and they were held for ransom, then they have to pay what they stood to lose. Basically, the marauders or the robbers would ask people to empty their wallets. If you got lost in the desert and you required a guide to help you out, then basically everybody would be assessed a flat fee because everybody's life is on the line in that situations. So we find different models in the Gemara, wealth or just a flat fee. And both of them are really based on the benefit that would accrue to you to having security, so you wouldn't lose basically what you have. In most shuls, they don't have security during the week, which might be an issue in some neighborhoods. They have security on Shabbos and Yontif. They have it on Shabbos morning, not always on Friday night, although some shuls have it both, mostly through volunteers. It's interesting, the Maharam Rutenberg, one of the great, the last of the Bali Tosfos, and the great posek in Germany, he discusses a case where the Jews of a local town took turns guarding the city, but then they hired security personnel. And he says, when people are guarding it themselves, then they all have an equal responsibility, and it's not based on your income, your wealth. But if they hire a security guard, then it's divided based on your income level, meaning how much you stand to lose if the city wall should be breached. The Trumas Hadeshen, writing a few hundred years later, prefers volunteers because it's their responsibility. But if they can't do it, they hire a replacement. And again, it's based on income. And the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch codifies the halakha. So if you have to hire, again, it's a model that is interesting, that it's based on how much you stand to lose. So if you are a wealthy person, you'd stand to lose more than a poorer person. A person doesn't earn as much money as you or have as nice a house as you. And the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah codifies this halacha. What we do, and most shuls do, since shuls basically are a hybrid of wealth and dues. And generally speaking, in most communities, the wealthier people generally contribute more than those who don't have them. I mean, people that just pay the basic dues and a few minor contributions during the year. But if the shul decides that volunteers are the best way to go, and there are others who'd rather hire a guard, then the fund should only come from those who don't want to volunteer, not from the shul's budget, which is why we assess a fee. We assess a flat fee. But then again, there are always those who might want to contribute more. So this is in general how the structure works in terms of paying for security. What about Shabbos and Yontif? Is the need for security considered pikuach nefesh, a threat to life, to the extent that you can be machal Shabbos or machal Yontif in order to have this service, whether it's the volunteers themselves with walkie-talkies or even carrying weapons. Again, if there's pikuach nefesh, there's no question about it. If there's an imminent threat to life, then all bets are off. You do what you have to do, period, sof pasuk. That's it. However, is the current security situation deemed pikuach nefesh? And furthermore, are the walkie-talkies and are some of the other things that they do considered permissible on Shabbos and Yontif, even if it's not pikuach nefesh? And again, when it comes to pikuach nefesh, we're not interested necessarily in statistics. It's very clear, imminent danger, and therefore we do what we have to do. However, this might be a possibility of pikuach nefesh, or it might be a very remote possibility. And again, how far do we extend this notion? If you're hiring guards, then it's not an issue. They can carry their weapons, they have their radios, and it's not an issue. If you have a combination, like we have in Shomrei Torah, of an armed personnel as well as volunteers, can the volunteers have their walkie-talkies in case of an emergency to contact the police? When this idea was initially broached, Rabbi Yudin was opposed to having volunteers with walkie-talkies on Shabbos. Rabbi Markowitz has a more lenient approach, apparently, because our volunteers do have walkie-talkies, as do many, many shuls in the New York area and elsewhere. The Mefarshim try to establish criteria for what's considered a imminent threat, shall we say, and there are nuanced differences between different formulations. But basically, if there's no imminent threat, then pikuach nefesh cannot be employed. If there's no imminent threat. Now, how do we determine if this situation that exists currently of anti-Semitism in America, and we live very close to a large Arab community in Patterson, is this statistically an imminent threat or not in terms of pikuach nefesh to allow our volunteers to carry walkie-talkies? And what is the avera there, and what are the halakhic considerations? So, for example, if there's a davar she'eino miskavein, it's not your intention to be machal Shabbos.
What?
If your intention produces an unintended prohibited result, so davar she'eino miskavein might be permissible according to some views. If the intended result is unavoidable, something we call a psik reisha, then most people will say that's prohibited midoraisa. And then you have within the psik reisha, within the action that is unavoidable. I mean, if you're turning on a walkie-talkie, it's going to make a connection. There are different types of psik reisha. Psik reisha the nichale, psik reisha the lo nichale. Is it consequential? Is it beneficial? There's a lot of halachic discussion onto what you may or may not do on Shabbos, whether it's biblical or whether it's rabbinic, and what violations are occurring. If it's only rabbinic, there are some poskim who permit psik reisha lo nichale if it's the Rabbana. Avadia Yosef is lenient. There are other leniencies. Zalman Nechemia Goldberg. There are a lot of poskim who would say that given the fact that this is a concern, even though it may not be an imminent concern of pikuach nefesh, but it is a concern. It could very quickly turn ugly. We allow, there are poskim who allow Jewish security personnel to carry walkie-talkies. And again, the technology of walkie-talkies, given the new technology that's available today, may not be as serious as it was in yesteryear in terms of violating Isurim Doraisa. So there are heterim, and each shul will ask its Morah D'Asra to make a determination. Obviously, we made a determination in Shomrei Torah at this point that this is permissible.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I have a question. I mean, clearly, anyone with a walkie-talkie is not going to discuss the weather. They'll have it on them, and Chatz v'Shalom, they need it.
Right.
So if they're going to use it, then it's already at the madrega of pikuach nefesh. I think.
So the point is, they would use the walkie-talkie only if there were an imminent threat.
Exactly.
So, and this is why there are lenient points of view for that purpose. Even if you have to check the walkie-talkie every so often to make sure it's functioning, that's within that same getter of making sure that it's functioning when you need it. So there are a number of leading poskim that would rely on it, but there are some who say you shouldn't do it. That's the sort of
Wally,
are one issue. There's another one. Yes, go ahead.
if you hold that you're not allowed to use the walkie-talkie on Shabbos, wouldn't you also be prohibited from hiring a guy to do that for you?
No, not necessarily. No, because the guy is doing something for you only in a situation of pikuach nefesh. So he's standing there. If he stands outside the shul wearing a gun because you hired him to do that, you are not violating any isurim. He is not violating any isurim. You're not asking him to do anything for you on Shabbos that you wouldn't do yourself. If there were an emergency, you'd pick up a phone. You'd call the police. And we have phones around the shul that go directly to the police station. You pick up the phone and right away, it's a 911 call. We have those phones in the shul in a couple of places, I believe. Many shuls do for emergencies. If something should happen inside the building as opposed to outside the building. We have all types of fire alarm, although I don't believe with all the tchotchkes they have set up for security in the building, there's ever been a drill to show people how to use these things all over the building. But that hopefully will be coming soon. But there's another issue I just want to touch on. Surveillance cameras. We have surveillance cameras around the shul. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe they are turned off on Shabbos. I could be wrong. Because people were objecting to having their pictures taken as they come to shul on Shabbos and to the building. So the issue of surveillance cameras, I mean, you have, again, are there heterim for it? Yes. The same way you have surveillance cameras and electronic devices at the Kotel in Yerushalayim, for example, that you walk through on Shabbos. People have no interest in being videoed on Shabbos. So you're dealing with a psik reisha delo nichale. There's an unavoidable action that you really don't care about. And again, you can argue that completing the circuit might be d'Rabbanan, which many poskim hold. So there's more room for leniency there. If the image is being depicted in real time, you might have some poskim hold that an image on the screen is like a form of writing, of ksiva. Now, it's Eina Shel Kayama. So if it's not something that remains there, and which also would be a way to make it d'Rabbanan, and if you have two d'Rabbanans, it would certainly make it more lenient. But clearly, if there's a security need to leave the screen on, and because it might be considered a shasakak, it's an emergency situation that you might be in, there are poskim that would allow it.
Wally,
Yes.
so having on Shabbos morning the guard that's there and our own people who are now connected to these earphones at the same time, does that create a problem with the leniency for us to do it? Because we have someone there who's a non-Jew that's doing it anyway.
Yes.
So does that create any problem for the heter at all?
So well, what you're really asking is, if we do have armed guards in front of the shul, why do we need volunteers?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the heter becomes more of a problem.
Yeah. So it's a very good question. I'm not the one to give you the answer on that. If we have hired armed guards, do we need to have volunteers with walkie-talkies on Shabbos? It's a very good question that I'm not in a position to answer. It's an excellent question.
Two heads are better than one.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extra. Again, from a security perspective, I'm not in a position to answer it, and from a halakhic perspective, I'm not in a position to answer it. But that question has to be asked of those who do have the answers. There's also
I-
the issue of muksa involved here. Go ahead.
There are a lot of shuls that have that, in Teaneck here, other places where they have congregants, because at least the Shabbos regulars, as opposed to a guest, might be recognizable to a congregant.
Yeah.
Not
So that's the answer that most people give. That having our own volunteers helps identify people who are not regulars and come to shul.
But they don't need the earpiece.
Yeah.
Just the volunteers to know people. You don't need something in your ear to walk around with.
Look, when I visit my son-in-law in Woodmere, they have volunteers, and they check everybody's talus bag before they walk in the shul.
wow.
If you're carrying a bag, they check. They're very careful, and they have two entrances, and sometimes they close the main entrance and force you to go around the side entrance where they check you out, and they know who you are. I know on Sukkot, I carry my lulav in a rifle case, and it gets checked all the time, which is fine. But the halakhic issues, the issues of muksa, the issue of psik, the issues of what they call kli shemalachto leisur, where something doesn't have any inherent purpose except for an emergency. All different types of muksa. We'll give a separate discussion about the 6 different categories of muksa. These are all, and also the question is, in some shul, it doesn't happen. I don't think it happens in our shul. I'm pretty sure it doesn't. But I remember at the height of right after 9/11, a number of shuls in the community, conservative shuls in the community, had members who brought guns to shul on Shabbos, just in case. Now, how well trained these people are, I don't know. Is it loaded? These are serious issues. Bringing a gun. Again, in Israel, it happens all the time, but they're trained. Whereas in America, for sure, yes.
Don't quote me on it, but in Teaneck, there are shuls where the volunteers are carrying guns.
Okay. I assume they're trained. I hope they're trained. Again, these discussions are also widespread, even in the Gemara, where they talk about an incident during the time of the Chashmonaim, where somebody was wearing, hobnailed boots or shoes with nails in it, and it caused a problem. Again, another question, a more serious question, which may or may not be easy to answer, is: are we living in a state of sakana? Now, if you're in Israel, different parsha. But living in the United States right now, living in many European cities right now, are we considered to be living in a state of sakanas nefashos? And given the terrible incidents that have happened in Paris and other places, in New Jersey, you could make a case for that. You could make a case which would make it easier to have guards with walkie-talkies and people with weapons. So it's not a simple issue. You need to have very, very broad shoulders to paskin lahalacha. But clearly, there are many, many shuls that have their rabbinic authorities have asked the questions, have researched it, and they have come to the conclusion that it's certainly in keeping with the halacha, at least many perspectives within the halacha, to have not only armed guards on Shabbos, but to have Jewish volunteers with walkie-talkies on Shabbos in case they have to contact the police or bring down a suspected terrorist or what have you. So, but these are issues that are not new. The same concept existed in the time of the Gemara, and throughout the Middle Ages, these were very serious problems. Again, we don't live in walled cities. We live in much larger metropolises than they had in the Middle Ages. But in Middle Ages, individual cities were surrounded by a wall. And when they closed the wall, nobody could go in or out. So if you were traveling, you had to make sure you got where you were going before nightfall. Because once it became night, they closed the gates and nobody could come in. Big problem. for travelers. So today we don't have that issue, but we do have the issue of the potential for tragedy. People can come to shul. It happened in a number of cities where people, shot up the shuls, and then people died and people were hurt in a number of communities in America. As I said, we live very close to a very large Arab population in Patterson. We've never had any problem of people crossing over the bridges that I can recall in all the years that I've been in town. You have it in Teaneck, where they're much more valuable, and they live in the town. So there are issues that we have to be concerned with, and which is why most shuls, I would believe, have decided that it's within halakhic parameters to have guards posted with walkie-talkies and have armed guards, non-Jewish armed guards, hired to protect the shul's population. And the Jewish people there, merely to recognize any visitors or strangers, keep an eye out on them. Yes, question.
Yes, you might not be able to answer this. It's been a long time since I've been at the Kotel on Shabbos, and I know that the entrances to that area, there's always security. And I honestly don't recall whether on Shabbos, if you've got like a tallis bag or you're carrying a plastic bag with, I don't know, extra shoes or who knows what, if you put it on do they still use the X-ray machine on Shabbos, or do the Chayalim just check it by hand?
They check it by hand. There are two entrances to the Kotel area,
right.
And they check it by hand. There are cameras in place, but they do check it by hand. And they ask you. And I mean, there are many Israelis who carry guns all the time, and then they ask you if you're carrying. I remember the first time it happened to me. I went to the Great Synagogue on Shabbos, and the guard asked me, "Are you carrying a weapon?" Yeah, it was kind of shocked because there are many Israelis who do. Now, if you're wearing it on your hip, it's one thing. I was staying in a hotel in Yerushalayim on Purim that weekend when Goldstein shot up the Moras HaMachpelah. And I was staying with a friend who was supposed to go to one of these settlements for Shabbos that weekend. The roads were all closed. He couldn't go. So he invited his friend to come to him in the hotel. And the guy came with his rifle and his revolver, because that's what they did in his particular settlement. So he checked his rifle, but he kept the gun with him all Shabbos long. This is it's amazing that we have terrible gun violence in this country. We haven't outlawed automatic weapons, yet you have 18-year-old kids walking all over the place in Israel, all carrying weapons, and it's considered normal. And they don't have the problem of gun violence that we have here in this country. It's a very strange thing. So guns in the right hands obviously are very important. And whether we hire guards to carry the guns. We don't, even though there might be individuals who own weapons, I would be very leery of having people bring weapons into the shul. That personally, I wouldn't be happy with.
In Texas, you see that. Well, you don't, because they're not visible, but yeah.
Yeah, if people are trained in the use of weapons and they're responsible, that's one thing. For people to go out and buy a gun just because they're afraid of what might happen and don't undergo extensive training, it's interesting. You can't drive a car until you pass a test, but you can buy a weapon. Tell me that makes sense. I get it. In any event, hopefully,
Wally,
safe. Yes.
so I think one of the challenges here that you have when you have two from people on a walkie-talkie walkie-talkie exchanging, talking to each other, that their subject matter doesn't go to certain places that are not just by simply saying, "How's your Shabbos?" or "What did the Mets do last night?"
But they wouldn't be. But they don't do that. I hope
Okay,
they
but
don't.
I think it's very easy to fall into that trap, that they have to make sure that they're training themselves not to basically go beyond certain parameters
I
in
think-
terms of discussion.
I am almost certain that is part of the training, that it's there for emergency use only.
I'm sure you're right, Rabbi Wally. Yeah,
Right.
they're supposed to get a mushy schmooze at least once, twice a year on the correct hashkafa they have.
I am sure they are trained on that. This is not a new question. And there is, I forget the name of the organization that provides the training for all the shuls, but they're pretty strict about that. It's there for emergency purposes. There are many shuls that have volunteers who don't have walkie-talkies. They just have people standing outside and make sure there are no strangers or faces you don't recognize, plus an armed guard. So you have all different types of combinations that exist. In the young Israel of Teaneck, there's one way to walk into shul, and they have an armed guard posted at the entrance. I don't believe they have volunteers there. Other shuls have we have several entrances. They have a combination of hired personnel and volunteers. Again, the only question is the nature of the isurim involved with the walkie-talkies, and there are sufficient heterim, given that many of these things can be interpreted as derabanan, combined with the potential sakonas nefashos, even though it's not actual. There are poskim upon whom you can rely. There are other poskim who are much more strict. So, as I said, when this was first brought up to Rabbi Yudin, he was opposed to it. Now, Rabbi Yudin doesn't make those decisions; somebody else does. So, we have a different approach. Obviously, people are pushing for it, but put that aside. So there are panim lakan and panim lakan. Hopefully, we should live in a time where this won't be necessary anymore. That's all I can say. And we hope for Shalom al Yisrael and Shalom in America.
Amen. Shkayach, have a great day.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.
You feel better, Mendy,
Yes.
Thank you.
and honey too. Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a